warm welcome to all of you to this 92nd session of Art Matters, organized by the Raza Foundation in collaboration with the International Center. It has been a long journey, as you know, and some of you have been witness to the journey of creating kind of a critical buzz around the arts. Today, we have three eminent artists. Each one of them has deviated in some ways from the conventional mode of art practice. It is very difficult to define deviation. It can occur in many different ways. An artist can decide to deviate from the dominant style or mode. That is one kind of a deviation. An artist can also decide that he or she is exhausted or bored and wants to deviate from her own style or her own vision. So that is a self-chosen deviation. And this is not something which is entirely new. Apart from philosophical reflections, deviation has been a very important mode of creativity. Even in our tradition, one of the greatest epics, in fact the largest epic of the world, the Mahabharata, is really an epic of deviations. I mean, the main story goes on and suddenly Deviations decided to go into and deviate and goes into somewhere, then remembers that he has to come back, so he comes back. So here is a very interesting, in the Dastans that we had in the medieval India, the Dastans were also wonderful examples of very interesting deviation. The chap is telling you one story and he sort of goes into, even now Mahmood Farooqi, when he does the Dastan, he goes into all kinds of, so that is what it is. Now, we have three, as I told you, Ravi Agarwal. I mean, he has an interdisciplinary practice. Photographer, artist, environmental campaigner, writer, curator. You have Manisha Parekh, who in the times when, once I said about Swaminathan, that when the dominant mode was places and people, in Swami's work there was no place and there were no people. He was painting what he wanted to do, so that was a masterly deviation. So in times when the new narrative continues to dominate, Manisha Parekh decides to explore the abstraction. So that is one deviation from the given mode. And again we have Vibha Galhotra, who's a conceptual artist, multimedia over, sculptures, installations, photographs, videos, site-specific works, public art intervention, etc. So you have three very distinguished artists going to talk to you. Please come and sit here. The choreography is not exactly designed to have two ladies on the sides and a male sitting in the middle. That's how it is now, so we have to accept it. It's not intentional, just done by someone. Each one of them will have 15 to 20 minutes. The schedule is maximum 1.5 hours, which means if we start now, we can go up to 8 o'clock, 8:15, which will include at the end, first they talk about their own practice or whatever they want to say about deviations. They are free to say that I have not deviated, I have done whatever I wanted to do, there is no deviation. So there is no intention to necessarily call them deviators. They may be, they may not be. Secondly, after they have talked, each one makes the presentation, then there will be some time for them to discuss between themselves if they want to do anything. Then it will be open to the audience for question and answer. So there you are. And we start with Manisha Parekh.
The most reluctant of the speakers.
I didn't even accept it, and I saw my name printed in the program. So there we are. Why is this not? Oh. Can I have full screen? Pause. Yeah. And 1 minute.
Yes.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Ashokji, for trapping me in this. I don't know, I spent many days lost thinking about this word deviation, and I think I called him to explain it to me, and he kind of eased me out, but still I had much to think about it on my own to figure out how I can create a story for this evening at least. Just to begin with, I will start with maybe 4 or 5 images of my very early work. So I went to the art college in Baroda to study painting in 84. And I did my undergraduation plus post-graduation over there. And I was fortunate to have very good tutors. To begin with, Nasreen Mohammadi was the art teacher for foundation course. Ghulam Ahmad Sheikh was the head of the department of painting. He personally kind of guided us through the postgraduate course and the dissertation, and I then had a year at Kanoria Center. So while I'm in Baroda, the trend there is figurative, narrative paintings, but I, for one, kind of deviated only to make objects. So I don't know, when I was putting these images together and I was thinking, perhaps I'm a deviator from the beginning, maybe. And the objects also had to be mine, to inculcate that personal interest, to spend hours in observing the objects. So these are my shoes. And then to follow them in whichever medium I'm working. So I think the idea was also to learn about medium as well as to learn about drawing and painting. What was amazing was Ghulam Ahmad Sheikh introduced me to this wonderful Italian artist, Giorgio Morandi, and I must be in second year college at that time, And so at that point you are only trying to imitate, to get as close as possible to the skill the masters have. So this is another image. For maybe till the undergraduate course I never kind of got into figurative painting, but finally did, because the environment influences you. And this is probably the last image in India, and then I got the fellowship, INLAC scholarship to go to Royal College of Art in London. And over there, the figures completely took a walk out of my work, and it became totally object-oriented work. Objects which were emblematic of the new culture and surrounding I was in. So I was very curious about the hand and foot gestures while I was making work in Baroda, but suddenly hands and feet were getting covered with gloves and shoes. So shoes became the dominant object, and the hats people were wearing. So this work is called "Can a Shoe and a Hat Take a Bath in the Bathtub?" Can a shoe and a hat lie in a bathtub? I think that is the title. Also, those years in London was almost a transformative time when I was away on my own, being in London, being surrounded by museums, where it was possible back in early 90s to see works in flesh. Those are days we didn't have internet, we didn't have that kind of information streaming in. So to be in an environment where one could see works in flesh became a different kind of learning. There too I had some fantastic tutors, Ken Kiff being one, and Jim Mooney. And I think it became 2 years of conversation within myself, and maybe there was a beginning of a personal language starting. I started making drawings in series, drawings and watercolors. And series meant like if I had a thought or an idea, I would start with one piece and just continue doing the variations of it till I exhausted myself, and the work would enlarge, kind of become an embroidery on the wall, and it would speak of a different kind of narrative where there would be a beginning to a unit and the end. So I think the idea of narration changed while certain amount of objects and abstraction was coming in. This was a convenient way of making work, because when I came back to India, I didn't have to fuss about having a big studio. I just needed a table and a chair, and I could continue working. And these were palm-size small works, which allowed me to explore the possibility of working small and how it can be kind of blown into a larger piece. I'm going to straight go to my current studio, which is a room in our home. So in a domestic setup, but away from the domestic setup. And I'm introducing you to some kind of tools now I work with. So the practice has moved to working with paper, fabric, fiber, making objects while I'm still continuing to draw and paint. And I think what happened was exploring new materials, understanding the materiality of different kind of surfaces, made new challenges possible and made new kind of energy possible. So making objects, drilling holes in it, building up surfaces with layers of paper, stitching bits which would be the projection to this work. And this is a work titled Enshrined, where I'm kind of making a personal shrine and a ritual. And the boxes are covered with paper. Paper is like a skin, almost the top of the body. And when I started working with silk on it, it felt like I was adorning the body. And each bit of silk felt like I was embellishing it. And the grey band behind almost staged as a field in which this assemblage was installed, almost like an altar. Again, some process pictures of a work which was probably the largest which I have made. I had to borrow my father's studio to work in for this. Again, I want to point out that pretty much just laboriously working with layers of paper, building the surface, having the surface as tactile as possible and keeping it alive so that my interest in making work is also alive because I could get bored easily. And to then feel that surface was not enough, projecting out of the surface became the need, and not just projecting out of the surface, projecting outside of the frame also started to become a need. And this was almost an experimental work, so I do title it as still in the process. So I don't know whether the work is resolved, but it's a step I had to take, and I think it helped me in my practice further. I'm going back now 25 years back. When I was casting from the iron vessel, which is tasla, which is used by the construction site, mainly women, carrying the cement mix and the debris from there. And my interest was, and it's the rice paper which I'm casting on it, and the interest was to get some really warm rust stains out of it. And the other material is nada, which is actually used as drawstring for a pajama. But I think what I was exploring was to look at everyday material and to see what I can make out of it. And probably this got prompted by being at Khoj. We started Khoj in 97 and 98, 2 years I was part of the workshop. We went there to make site-specific work, but I think those were early 90s, so outside the comfort level of our studios, so the resources were the market and the shops and what a small town can offer. And it's like one went unprepared, and the idea behind was that if you're creative, you can make something out of nothing. And so these molds, just kind of mounds, just signified that. I made series of it. And in 2001, I was invited to be part of the Indo-German public art project, which was called Art in Nature. And I think these paper cast mounds led to making these earth mounds, where I worked with the gardeners over there with organic material. So this was jute rope, rope which is used for scaffolding in construction, grass broom, and the bamboo broom. And this is how it looked. The work stayed at site for about 6 months. It was interesting to see how it was weathering, how it changed during different seasons. And then finally, the ropes came back and sat in my studio for 6 years. I think they had a long sleep there. And one fine day, I started to play around with the rope. Started twisting and twirling, and it has a tautness which doesn't allow you to bend beyond a point, and started twining it with thinner jute rope, which is a sutli, and then it became like a taut shape. And to me, it started to look like maybe a 3D calligraphic shapes which were acquiring on the wall. The process was laborious, and it was almost like you were hiding a secret while making it, so I call it secret within. And somehow jute became quite an obsessive material to work with, so I continued working with it. So This is a work called Murmur, which I did for Meera Manisha's show in 2009. And the work stayed with me for a long time. So I got a chance to reinstall it in 5 different places with different formations, which made me understand what could be the conversation between the space and the object. And the idea which Nasreen Mohammadi had inculcated within us in our first year was she used to take an object drawing class and have a heap of objects in center of the room. And she would say the first decision is, are you going to take the vertical side of the paper or the horizontal? So it was like a decision you are making as to what how the work is going to be. And the second was, it's not just what the drawing acquires this shape on the paper, but it is the negative shape of that drawing which becomes important. I don't think I understood it at that time. I think these were big ideas. They were passed on to us, where you just listen and somehow take it in. But it's while I start installing work now that I understand that it's not just the space acquired by the object, but it's also the space, vacant space, which becomes part of the conversation. So this work in a different formation. This was in a show which was curated by Rakhi Balram in Art Life's space in Gurgaon. This is in Kiranadar, and I showed in 2 other places I don't have the images for, but just to show that it was very interesting and a learning process for me as to how one can change and transform the space by different kind of formation of the same work, same practice. About 15 to 20 years back, I was designing grills for my home in Vibha, and it was interesting. The welder just said, why don't you draw on the floor? And the welder started following the lines I was making, and we could build up into a grill for a window. And that seemed like a very interesting process and experience, which kind of laid dormant in me. And in 2019, Meera invited me to be part of her show called Shadow Lines in Shrine and Empire Gallery, and I started working with the welders again. So making the shapes, then the welder makes these, follows the shape, and then I have 2 of the same and I start connecting them. And becomes a bit like that. And what eventually became was a set of work, I think it was 10 or 9 pieces, where it was simple. I was just excited by how the shadows fall and how, even for me, it was difficult to say whether it's a shadow or the body of the metal. And so the title just naturally came about to say, is it me or is it you? Because you changed the direction and you couldn't say what was what. And I find these simple things really interesting, because to me it becomes like a 3D drawing, and it changes with the changing of the angle. I was introduced to the metal sheets doing a commission work a couple of years back, and it connected me to the kind of work I was making with the paper by cutting papers. And the dummy I made by cutting papers, but the metal sheets then became enlarged. It could scale up and we could cut it up, and I worked in a fabrication unit which is started and encouraged by Vibha, Galhotra and Rahul. It's a fantastic place to work with. And I was again back working with the hammersmiths and welders. It was a scale I couldn't have done it myself. While for me and my practice, the presence of hand is very, very important. So it's my hand making work, or I have other people's hands making work. And I find that contact very, very important. And these sheets, these metal sheets, they come very, how should I say, very strangely flat and shiny. But the minute there is human contact, there is oxidization, there is patina which starts to form, and there is a difference in color immediately, and certain kind of aging starts with the exposure to the environment, and you put it outside in rain and it comes back with wonderful kind of transformations. And for me, that was the fascinating part, that change with the human contact. And the metal I was working with was mainly copper and iron. These are the two metals we see in our kitchen, and these are the two metals which have been used forever with the kitchenware. So the connection with history and human contact is what just completely fascinated me. And this transformation felt like an alchemy which was happening as the work and the pieces were getting handled. So for me, I mean, something like that becomes like the process which leads me on, and this is how they were getting built. And the work looked like that in final stages. In my last solo show last year in Nature Mart Dhanmit space. So the work is called Alchemy. Some details follow. And again the play of shadow, because shadows become like an elongation of the shape, became quite interesting and exciting. These are little surprises which when you begin to install the work, we don't preempt, and I think they kind of become the charging battery to go ahead with the work. That is a welded piece, another piece called Following You, again talking about shadows, following you. And the exhibition comprised of a large body of works on paper, primarily done during the time one was confined to the studio during the lockdown. I think I spent hours looking at the vacant blank sheets of paper and nothing would happen. And suddenly a loaded brush coming in contact with the paper would break the ice of the surface. And unplanned sweeps of colors would just lead me on, and all kinds of things like smaller activities while making the work. I mean, the work starts a bit randomly, and then I start to collect the work and build an image out of it. So it's a bit like a play in the open, and then you start to gather back whatever you have thrown, and then put a meaning to it. So this work is a series of work called Edge of Illusion. I don't know why I'm calling this fairies. I'll just run through the images. These are called An Embrace. These are moon blossoms. It's a difficult task to put a title to a work. For me, the most difficult part at the end of the journey, because those words then lead me on and the viewer on to something, so it's a big responsibility. That's the last image, and I think looking back, the practice has been a lot about making something out of the distractions. I think I'm a very distracted person as such, and it's like even in school days, I think it was the course book, and inside there would be a novel to read. I think that was the kind of I mean, you do something on the side, something illicit, I would say, like hours of watching Netflix, but you are also working. So I think it's doing the other which makes you do what you need to do. It's almost like you meander out, you wander out, you almost get lost, but you then come back in. So it's almost been a circular kind of practice where you do something else, you veer, you kind of swirl about and you get out of this system and then you kind of center yourself back to do something. And I think centering has become a space which becomes the studio space and which becomes a mind space. So I think the practice has been about being in the studio and outside of studio and how it feeds into each other. That's it.
Ravi Agarwal.
Thank you, sir, for inviting me once again at Raza Foundation, and thank you, Manisha, for such a beautiful and sensitive insight into your practice in relationship with materials and the evolution to that relationship. It's really the first time I've heard you speak about it, so it's really a treat, actually. I was, like all three of us, were thinking about what to say in Deviations. And as you know, I've spoken about the practice in your forums earlier, so I wanted to speak a bit about the ideas which inform my practice, and then speak about a few of the current projects I've completed or in the process of doing. And so, as you know, that I left side from the beginning. Okay. So for me, art has always been located in question. For a long time, since the last 25, 30 years, when I started getting involved in issues of labor and nature, and I sort of think of them together in the context of social and environmental justice. These questions my practice became more and more located, both in what you might consider my art practice, but also my social and environmental practice. And they became very focused, like a preoccupation, a mission to do this and to change something. And 30 years back, and the photograph was my main medium since I was 12 years old. And so I had, to me, when I got invited as an artist to the art world, because at some point that happened, then you also get exposed to a whole variety of new possibilities and new mediums, which you would not have otherwise if you're not in that world. You meet people, you see practices, you're invited to experiment. So despite all the criticisms of the art institutional space, as an artist, these are spaces where you can experiment and experiments are accepted for what they are, as experiments. So I think that's very, very freeing for me. But I was also involved for the last 30 years in a very particular social change organization as an environmentalist, an organization which still functions after 25 years. And I had got an increasingly deeper insight into the practices of environmental change, environmental policy, environmental activism, what was happening in the area, reading data, etc. Two different worlds. But for me, the concerns were always the same. And I, over the years, came to see, after a lot of involvement with this question, both as an activist or at many levels, that there were two clear dimensions in the environmental question which we are confronted with. And I'm simplifying it, but maybe it helps to simplify things sometimes. One was clearly what they call managing better, regulate better, manage everything better. Manage the environment better, manage the waste better, manage the water better. And the other was to think of completely alternate trajectories. There's something that's gone wrong historically, in our relationship to what we call nature, and we have to rethink the whole concept of it. In the first area, which is the area what you call in common here everywhere in policy, it's called sustainable development. And sustainable development means all that, how to develop sustainably. And you have many things. But we'd already seen in the early 70s a report from somebody called the Club of Rome that this strategy was disastrous. It's not going to happen. Nobody listened to them. It was thrown out by Reagan, it was thrown out by Margaret Thatcher, and today we see it's all coming true. And for a long time, I sort of saw this trajectory, that this trajectory is not going to lead us very far. And I started getting involved in what are the alternative trajectories. So I started reading areas of literature and academic writing, which led me to histories of ideas, philosophies and histories of ideas of nature. And that's where my art practice started getting located. And the art practice, because it was the only way I could experiment with ways which are imaginary, which are open up disciplinary boundaries. I don't have to be an engineer, sociologist, or a scientist. I can open up boundaries because I'm dealing with questions that affect lives. And this part of it still I value very much because it's becoming now increasingly sort of common. You see every second show has the word nature in it now. And you see these, but to me, this is the only space where you can open up the possibilities of what was the earlier ways in which imagination got contained through process of colonization of nature and the long history which you can read about and all that. And what are the new relationships which we can learn from the past? What can we learn from those past relationships which lead us to new futures? That was the question I continue to engage with. And so you go back to a point where knowledge started being defined in certain pedagogies and methods, and you go back to a point where different relationships are still present, what many people call indigeneity, but I don't call indigeneity, I call it living tradition, because it's still prevalent in many parts of the world. From a European context, it becomes indigeneity. You can only find it in the Amazon Indians. India, we can find it in Tamil Nadu, we can find it in our households as well. It's just having value to do that. So what are those values we can learn from there, which we can apply for the contemporary moment? It doesn't mean going back to the past of communities of power and sort of non-freedoms, but to what we can learn. So that has been my main concern right now for a long time, and this is looking at practices, thinking of collaborations where we can learn about new relationship with nature. And so when I wear my hat as an artist, which is now almost all the time, or sometimes as a curator, very little time I'm working as an environmentalist. I think the organization continues to do that. We have to think of what kind of formations, what kind of communities can we think of. And these are the questions through which these few projects which I'm engaged with, which I'd like to share with you. My experiments, if you want to use the word deviation, which I'm not talking about today, is my evolution of my photographic form, which was started from a very classic documentary form, then went to a certain kind of expansion of language with text and video, but also with performance, and then with installation and public installation. There's been, as any artist has, a slow evolution, because as one learns one medium better and better, one gets to sort of go beyond it, because one knows its boundaries and its fissures at the same time. But it takes a long time. It took me 25 years to start doing that. I suspect it takes a long time for any practice to move beyond one's medium. I think we should tell young artists that more, but anyway, people are impatient. So the question which I constantly ask myself, that can art have a transformative potential? And can it go from representation to discursive? Can it present a worldview which is not only representing an existing condition, not be a witness of the time, but actually present a possibility of another way of being? And I believe both in the yes, strongly actually, possibly the only way. I'm not going to, so this is, I'm just going to take it quickly through 3 of the projects. This is a project which is currently installed. It's showing in a place called the Safentan Vineyards in Switzerland. I was invited because 3 years back I had a research residency in Switzerland to look at, I was examining the histories of Swiss landscapes. Because there's a picture postcard of Switzerland, like of Scotland, that these are beautiful landscapes. It's a tourist marketing. It goes almost 200 years back. But there's a whole structure below that, which is financial, economic, erasure of language, the sort of human imprint on making everything smooth, the grass should be perfectly cut. There's this whole human imprint on that landscape, which is invisible to how we got there. And this is what I call the colonization of nature. This existed at the same time across the world. Though we as a nation state were colonized, at the same time we were colonized. We were also colonizing nature along with the British colonizing, the Scots colonizing their nature. So the colonizing in nature happens across the world in the early 20th century and maybe a little earlier. The conditions were earlier. This particular project is a collaboration with a glaciologist whom I've known for a while. And basically these are 4 videos which discuss 4 questions about the boundaries of art and science, the process of art and science making. Incidentally, with some materials, research materials, my collaborator lives in Chile, so we are working in the twilight zone, which means that when she was sleeping, I was waking up. When I was waking up, she was sleeping, almost. And we were working in this twilight zone, and I call it the Twilight Zone Project. And we decided the conversation is the project. And we had done common research in the Rhone Glacier, and she's a glaciologist who works in Patagonia. So we bought some of this. And the question, the 4 videos are also online now, but you have to listen. There are also a conversation with a local anthropologist who's an indigenous origin person, but a properly trained anthropologist. The way he brings indigeneity and contemporary scientific method into his thinking is really, really interesting. But what was most interesting, they offered us this location, which is a 15th century, 1497 church. It's a medieval church where we were allowed to show this. They invited us to show this work. They're still on. And I thought of Galileo, because Galileo is the time of the Renaissance, right? It's the same time when Galileo is there, and Da Vinci and all our great sort of Renaissance figures are there. And the whole question of God is being questioned at that time, right? And they're called sacrilegious and all that. And in the same church, in a similar time church, we are showing this art and science project in the presence of the great holiness, in a sense. So how these things have come round a circle, and these conversations have become really complicated, not to reject one, but to see how to think of them together. It taught me a lot, both talking to a scientist over a whole year and a half, and then producing the work, it taught me a lot. The precursor to this work was a visit, a residency I was invited to in Scotland, in Edinburgh actually, by the Edinburgh printmaker. It was a printmaking residency, and I traveled through the Highlands for a month. And what struck me was, and this work is called, this body of work called Nadar Prakriti. Nadar is the Gaelic word for nature, and Prakriti, as we know, is the Sanskrit for nature. And I was thinking of the synergy between the language of the Gaelic language and its signage with nature, and the Sanskrit idea of nature, which is both not captured in the word nature in English. You know, the linguistic transmutations which happen when you translate or transliterate something, that these words have different meanings. And what I discovered through that research and that topic which of this shows, I visited archives there, and I was photographing, I was traveling. There were 2 events which happened in Scotland in the early 20th century. One was something called the Highland clearances. And in the Highland clearances, the British nobility went into Scotland, killed all the bulls because they wanted to breed sheep, made something called the Scottish tweed. The Scottish tweed was not from Scotland, it's a production of the sheep, with the British nobility. And they exterminated the wolf because wolves and sheep cannot live together. And they took all the peasants out. So they cleared, so you picture the peasants moving out. There's another picture which I'm not showing you, which is of the shooting of the last wolf. And there's a print of that. And then I sort of worked with these ideas, and I spoke to an Indian historian as part of the work, and Mahesh Rangaraju, you might know. He's an eminent historian ecological historian. And I discovered that in the first Director General of the Indian, then British India Forest Service was German, seconded by the Scottish Forest Service, because the British imperial government had no forest service. So India had so many forests, and they then, sometime I think not wrong in 1857, I think it's Richter was his name, I could be wrong on the name, but something similar. They seconded the German guy who worked for the Scottish service to come to India, and he failed because he was a temperate forester. Then he learned, he was an intelligent guy. It was the beginning of the Imperial Forest Service. The experiment was in India. And the next time they did it in Africa. And then it became the beginning of... What I was saying, that the colonization of nature takes place at the same time across the world. They're colonizing the forest here. They're colonizing the forest, the landscape in Scotland, because that's when the Highland regions start. And then if you look at Swiss history, at the same time, similar things are happening. There are certain moments in time where nature becomes colonized, in a sense. And so these are the connected projects, and this is, of course, I worked with lithographs and copper etchings. For the first time I learned these things, and it was fantastic to use my hands again, because photography has become more and more abstract machine. So it was good to put hands back in chemical to tell us. And then another project which I want to talk to you about is called Else All Will Be Still. It's a project which I did from 2013 to 2016 at a fishing village in the coast of Tamil Nadu. And I spent a lot, it was like what most of my projects start. They start with curiosity. I'm just curious. I went with a question that who are these people, what kind of relationship do they have with the sea? I ended up with this question you see in the end, is the sea I see, the sea he sees. That means, are we the same, is nature a cultural construct? Do we see things which we can argue, we can discuss that at another point, but in a sense, it showed to me that the relationship of the sea with of the fishers was very different than my relationship with the sea. My relationship with the sea was kind of abstract, beautiful, stormy, etc. The relationship with the sea was this last work I did, which is Extreme Left, which is an installation on the beach, with the words I had gathered when I asked them, what does the sea mean to you? And they told me those words. And you might be surprised, the words they told were very material. They were everyday life words. They would talk about beach, they would talk about port, they would talk about MLA, politics, drawing. Because for them, the sea was everydayness. It is nothing abstract, which you go and visit for a holiday. It was real life. And to me, this abstraction of nature leads to the idea of when nature gets exploited, because nature becomes a category and not a particular production of a relationship. So these works are actually this learning process, and at every work I'm learning things, and I go with questions, and I never think of them as projects, but they end up becoming projects because the artist in me takes over at some point from the curious person. But I also work with a scientist along that. It's a marine biologist marine scientist I work with, looking at the sand movement. We also did tests on the sand, looking at microplastics in the sand. So it becomes everything. That's the reason I called my presentation Entanglements. It becomes everything. Everything I know or learn becomes part of that project. It becomes, and this had another sort of thing. I got introduced to Sangam poetry through this master poetess who lives in Oregon. She introduced me to these two fantastic books. One is, of course, the famous Ramanuja, Poems of Love and War, which is a transcript from classical Tamil. Incidentally, the Sangam poetry, called Sangam much later, but the discovered manuscripts were from said to be between 300 and BC to 480, done by 400, they assumed 400 poets. But it's very interesting, this poetry, and I've spoken about it before. It has two separate kinds of things. One is called the Akham poetry and one is the Puram poetry. The Akham poetry is the poetry of the interior. It describes 5 landscapes. They're metaphoric and real landscapes. They're like the Nile, which is the sea, and so there are the sea, the forest, the mountain, and the desert, for example. Now there's no desert in Tamil Nadu, or in Tamil Land. Tamil Nadu is more recent. But it's the absence of love. So related to each of these landscapes is the idea of love. So love on the sea, the Nile landscape is somebody waiting on the shore, waiting for the lover to come in. It's a love of pining and waiting. And the love of the desert is a love of absence, is the loss of love, right? And they have their flowers, representative flowers. So it's a fantastic. But the most interesting thing why I got interested is, as I said, I'm interested in this idea of relationship to nature, and how we relate to nature changes what we do with it, because I believe how we relate to the world, what we are, how we relate to the world is the world we create. And the relationship with nature is very, very contemporary in a sense, almost postmodern. Because nature exists in a background of human life. It is not metaphorical, like even in Sanskrit poetry, right? It's not representing human beauty which refers to nature. Your eyes are not like the dove, they're like the doe, kind of, you know. But it's about where love takes place, where the stalk is. You know, this thing that is a backdrop of human life, not metaphorically referring to human life. So this thing of that you don't use everything for human consumption, human life, but they are parallel worlds in which we coexist. This to me was a very important idea because it is a very sort of formative idea for me, and I think to be talked about as well. And so I used this in a number of installations. I did a film and an installation at Kochi Biennial. I did a number of works around this idea. And I wrote a diary which got published, which my Guild Gallery published in a sense, and it's available also. But what was most interesting for me was, I was then invited to Havana Biennial in 2019. And I told them, I don't want to go and do something here. I want a collaboration. So I want to collaborate with your fishing community. So they connected me to the local fishing community. They are much more modern than our Tamil fishermen, but they are fishers at the end of the day, right? And so I took my work, my pictures and videos, and I didn't know Spanish, but a friend of mine came and became the translator. I spent 3 weeks with them, and then we produced this installation of work, which was a bit from there, and they gave me all the instruments to hang there. And when I showed them the work from the Tamil fishing community, they said, we cannot understand the language, but we know exactly what's going on. We understand fully the instruments, what they're saying, what they're thinking. This association of communities of practice, I found very endearing and very powerful. And to me, it was direct sort of that there are communities of practice which understand other ways of life, other relationship to the sea, which have become foreign to us because we just learn things differently, in a sense. So the last project I want to talk about is a very personal project called The Desert of the Anthropocene. I've shown it twice in the NJ Art Fair project room and in the Yunchun Biennial. It is a project of this my grandmother's Haveli. I come from Rajasthan, from a place near Navalgarh. It was a joint family. When I was growing up till I was 17, I used to go there every year. Because on the summer holidays, I used to go and spend 2 months with my grandparents. And I have great memories of this place. In fact, all my formations, my ideas of landscape are formed in that barrenness. It's a very particular place because it's 150-year-old Haveli. Nobody is abandoned, nobody lives there anymore. I'm the only family member who goes there regularly with a camera and a video camera. But the water table has gone from 150 feet to almost 2,000 feet. There are 3 cement plants around the area. There's complete quarrying. My grandfather had land in which he used to go all these local, Sangir, and Capri, and it's all this was sold, nobody lives there. But but there's a room called my mother's room where my mother and I used to stay. And you know, as you lived in villages, you put a dhoti and you bring the water up and you have a bath. So I really sort of deeply, and these are the bhai khatas of my grandfather used to write. He was a local trader in a sense. He was very well-to-do local trader. And this is an ongoing work from that. And my in this one, I worked with a cartographer, scientific cartographer, to look at my diary and then the satellite image of the whole area. It's a particular spectrum drawing. And then, of late, just a month back, I invited a printmaker friend of mine because I really want to experiment with my medium. I feel free to do that now. I don't care what happens to it because I come to the point that, okay, let's experiment. So there's a printmaker friend of mine whom I've known since 2008. I'll take 2 minutes. 2008, and then he's a proper printmaker, works with a etching machine and printing machine. So I said, let's do a collaboration. So I'll take it to the Haveli. We'll get a portable printing press, which we bought from here in Surat, in Ahmedabad, and we took it there, and it was 47 degrees. So I told him on the phone that, you know, Michael, it's very hot there. He said, I can handle heat. I said, Michael, you don't know what heat is. Because heat is not an event in India, heat is a condition. It's a 34 in the morning, it's not like it's 20 in the morning and 35 in the evening. It's a condition of life. And it completely, so we're calling the work, we don't know what heat is. So we came up over a week, 80 prints. Half of them we had in Switzerland and half we show in the Gallery's past show in the 35-year show in October. It's completely, so I was photographing, I had taken a photographic printer, I was photographing, and he was printing on that, and we used local materials, local mitti, local bhai khatas and materials. So we did all this experiment. To me, it's the most exciting experiment I've done, in a sense. And this is just one of the shows I curated, New Nature's Terrible Beauty is Born in CSMBS. And this icon is showing, which is our dear friend Zulekha Chaudhary directed, landscape as evidence, artist as witness, and which is a very dear project for me. So again, I want to just say that there's no limit to an artist's medium, and if we can think of exactly what kind of ideas we want to work with, then the world is open. Thank you.
Vibha ji.
Thank you,
Close it for you.
I hope you know it. This computer is exit. Right. अभी नहीं चला रहा, it's not on screen. Thank you for Manisha and Ravi for such a wonderful presentation, and thank you Ravi for making it easy for me as my work, lies in the same direction.
You're deviating with the mic.
Okay. So today is all about deviation. Let me turn this on, deal with the technology. Slideshow. I would like to thank Raza Foundation, Ashok ji, and everyone organizing this event today and inviting me here and sharing my work and process. When I was asked to be part of this conversation, I was preparing for my solo exhibition, Climatic Whispers, at Goodman Gallery in London. The exhibition, which opened last week, showcased a few of my works from past 15 years, primarily stemming from my studio-based practice. To summarize my practice in few words, it is a multidisciplinary art practice that addresses the shifting topography of the world, radically transformed by climate change, consumerism, capitalism, and globalization. For today's talk, reflecting on the deviation in my artistic journey, I would like to share my evolution as an artist and as a person. I completed my master's degree in Shantiniketan, a place that provides a place. I can't see. That provided the space to explore and let my imagination soar. There I honed my skills with various materials and developed deeper into natural landscape. In my early days, my work was very personal, drawing heavily from my experiences and influences of nature. Although I was not initially aware of environmental practices or social or political art practices, I was organically driven towards them. My work at that time was more about interplay of form within the natural landscape. In continuation, my first ever exhibition, Space Within the Space, was held at the Max Muller Bhavan in Delhi. This exhibition featured digitally printed photos and 2 animation exploring my relationship with natural landscape of Shantiniketan. It was personal exploration of my identity at this point of my life. The stage photo work included sculpture created by my friend, classmate Ashish Ghosh, if you see the previous photo, and with my roommate Amrita serving as the actor in that photo. In those days, I worked with analog camera and slides, which offered a lot of endless possibilities. Sorry, I can't speak. This is, thank you. I have to go back so that you make a sense. I envisioned large print in cross-processing, and fortunately the printing studio supported me in producing those large 5x8 feet prints. 5x8 prints. My drawing about my experience and making 2 bodies of work was presented in stop motion animation, as you see in the drawings in the next slide. Come on. After this exhibition, in 2003, I decided to migrate to Delhi and had to support myself through commercial photographic project and creating design objects. I was doing photography in my early days. Fortunately, received INLAC's Indian grant, and that was supporting my studio practice. Opportunities for artists were very limited back then. It wouldn't be wrong to say that I'm a survivor. And through this journey, I created support for myself, and I'm grateful to all those who supported me, and more to those who did not, as they became the driving force in me. I was engaging in site-specific work and land-based work in the beginning of my career, both in India and abroad, collaborating and working independently, yet still searching for meaning in my work and myself. The art scene in India was growing rapidly, and both commercially and conceptually. As a new migrant to Delhi, the real world struggle began to reflect in my work. In 2005, I made this show at Anant Art Gallery between me and Delhi, which was self-reflective, but began to show elements of social and human adversity. Further, my residency in Johannesburg exposed me to the post-colonial world, its art, writing, music, and museums. I was profoundly impressed by the works of William Kentridge, William Boshoff, my friend Dr. Charlene Khan, David Kolbla, and my studio mates at Back Factory. Reading Stuart Hall, in those days, those pre-Google days, everything had a sense of surprise, which allowed me to venture into my own thought process. Nowadays, opening multiple windows on Google often leads to a deluge of similar information shaping one's viewpoint with little room of imagination. The mix of satire and technical skill, I have to go back, always got my attention, and I made the new body of work in Johannesburg, Oxford, and in Delhi for my solo exhibition, Where Do We Come From, What Are We, and Where Are We Going? All the titles are actually written below, not in this slide, but otherwise. So, questioning the existence of human in so-called created structures. Continuing my exploration of structure, I had following exhibition Metropia. So this was basically where do we come from, what are we and where are we going. So I was still trying to figure out my own self. And this was my next exhibition at Project 88, which was all about, the urban spaces which were creating structure. And coming from a small town, I think I was very struck by this frenetic, growth in the cities. And real change or deviation happened with this work, which was an invitation by NDTV and the NDTV and Swechha organization. And I was recommended by a coach to go there and make a monumental sculpture. The whole idea was that school kids and other volunteers will come to the riverbank and they will clean the Yamuna River. And this was a real, actually, opening for me, because I never thought this is a river. I'm talking about pre-Google Map days where you don't know where the actual river is. I always mistook this place as a sewer. So when I went there, I was like, oh no, this is not the river, because I really had great memories of the river from my childhood days, because I lived in Haryana in my early days. And in Haryana, every weekend, I think my father used to take us for these picnics, to the Tajewala Dam or some other dam, or by the riverside, or Ambags, so mango farms we used to go a lot. So in my memory, the river was very clean and glorified. But seeing it here, it really killed my idea of a river. So this was the condition, and I aimlessly started documenting the river. So this was the river. There are very few pictures here. And I never thought that I will be making any artwork out of it. But there was an incident on one winter Sunday morning where this guy, was going to the river, and I stopped him by saying that it's really dirty, don't go for a holy dip. So, and he went for the holy dip because he was chanting at that time, and on his way back, he just had this conversation which left me in this absurd theater, of belief and reality, where I was just, his belief was that, how dare you to call my mother dirty? So that was like very strong statement for me, that I am not thinking this is a river or a mother, but he's believing that. And he's going for this holy dip in that cesspool, actually. And next, few days I was disturbed, and I was thinking what I can do and how I can bring in the public engagement. So basically then I brought my canvases to the river many a times. So you can see that there are different photographs, and there are a few photographs which I have put. I started going to the river for creating this conversation. In first 2 attempts I was completely failing, because this stinks so much. This is like an actual sewer. So the sediment of the river is like a cesspool. So I thought I will be making paintings with it, or maybe the landscape which is across the river. But that couldn't happen, and I started doing these action paintings, and I never brought them back to my studio. But then I thought maybe I need to play a role of a catalyst, or maybe these work need to play the role of catalyst to bring in the change, or at least start a conversation about the dying river. So basically these work appeared, and they've been showcased in many gallery spaces, and this is another show. And then for many years I advocated for the river and also other parts of the environment. Sorry, I'm going back and forth. So the next show which happened was in New York, where I did this work 365 days, where I was collecting the water, and then I was exploring different materials to kind of nudge the people with this conversation. So these are different lands around the river, and also the different communities around the river. So you see that I can only play with aesthetic and visuality. So, this was my strongest forte. So I thought I need to work through that. So that is what I was doing. And then I happened to make my first film, Manthan, which was based on Vishnu Purana Samundar Manthan story. But I took the lead from there, and I thought I need to churn the river out, churn the river and churn the sludge out of the river. So I curated, or I wrote this story, and then I made this short film, which is 15 minutes, I think 15 minutes or so. And in continuation, I think I was working on this show, Insanity in the Age of Reason, which was at Exhibit 320, where I was talking about the 5 elements and basically the traditional knowledge about the 5 elements. Where we are talking about ether, we are talking about earth, fire, water, and air. So in that, I would like to explain one word, which is air element. I came across this news one day in the newspaper where, we always read these pollution news in the newspaper every winter. And in 2016, I think, there was an ad, just below that news, there was an ad of air purifier. I was like, wow, this is a great marketing, way to sell the thing. First you create the fear, and then you sell the product. So I was like, okay, I need to catch this, because I like this satire, because we are living in the age of absurd. I think we are creating satire on our own self in the times. So, this is what I was, I wanted to create further satire, and I started researching about it. So then I come across this guy who became a millionaire overnight, who's selling these air cans from Britain. So the company called Ether, so his whole family goes with these air jars, the glass jars, and collects the air from Britain from different mountains. And they sell it for 115 pound, or it starts from 85 pound, it's just one breath. You open the lid and it's gone. So, I was thinking of this inequality, that how you can think of, buying these products, air purifiers, or air cans, or now oxygen cans as well. So, these are creating a new kind of inequality, which is environmental inequality. And I thought, okay, I need to do the parody, and I will go to those sites which are very polluted in Delhi, and I will collect the air from there and display it in the exhibition. So it is kind of fun, but there is a dark humor in all the works, I always feel. So we all know the garbage mound around the river. So it is seeping in and it is polluting the water. I think Ravi can explain that better than me. Then there is endless construction in Delhi or in India, for that matter. And so I find these developed country, kind of bullying us, or kind of saying, चिढ़ाते हैं कि अच्छा तुम्हारा country साफ नहीं है. So it's basically that moment I wanted to capture. I said, okay, I take that and I kind of create the satire back. So this was the body of work. But how to engage people in the environmental conversation is very, very important for me, because for me the viewer is also very important. If my work is not nudging, it's not creating any, penetration, so then it's no point making the work. So that's why I thought, okay. So then, I stumble upon things, while Googling. So, I come across that NASA has opened its image bank for Mars, because NASA, they are proposing the interplanetary life and possibility of living on another planet. And so then I was thinking, okay, living in a country where still we are thinking of untouchability, how to think of living on another planet. So I'm like, okay, another satire by the developed country. So I started looking into the image bank, and I started thinking that what can I do? So I came across that there is a university which takes these images from the rovers of NASA, and then they recolor it, because they imagine that there are metals here, there is a sign of water, there is sign of something else, da 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 da. So it's basically those, and then I said, okay, I'm going to reappropriate those images in my own work as well. So I curated this show which was called Beyond the Blue, though it got closed down in 2020 because of COVID-19. That's okay, I think, for good. So there were supposed to be 3 body of work in this show as I planned it, because I conceptually chose the materials for this body of work, where I was thinking that first I will do a performative work which is done in my studio. The performance was about markings, and the series was very inspired by Somnath Kaur's work of Wound series, and so that's why the work was deliberately called Wounded. Go next. So these are works Wounded, which are paper cast from the cement plates. So these are really large cast, 72 inches of paper, where I created these markings as performance in my studio, and then they were being casted in fragile material of paper, thinking of the fragility of the earth, because these are the extraction or the experimentation what we are doing to the earth. It's metaphoric, it's nothing from the documented. And the second part of the exhibition was supposed to have the photographic medium, which is again a parody and also inspired from Leonardo da Vinci's Last Supper. So I thought, okay, imagine this situation that everybody is going to Mars, but who will be those privileged people? So I asked my friends to be part of this photo series, which I wanted to curate. So there are 12 works in this series, and all these, actually, they are very nice people and very rich people who became part of this series, which is talking about that how people are going to abandon the unprivileged people. So we are going to be like cockroaches, and they will be flying to the Mars, and that's where they are living. So this is a whole series which narrates the whole story, and this is how the story was evolved, and it was shown at, it was not part of this show, but it was part of another show at Asia Society Trinali. Because my gallery said they can't sell the photographs, so they are not going to put the photographs. So they will show the paper works and the Ghungru works. So it was a great negotiation. So I will come to that in our talk. So this was another series which was about life on Mars. So basically looking at those abstract landscape which NASA is proposing to us. So I was looking at those and I felt, okay, these are beautiful images, let's reappropriate them. And I propose the Martian landscapes. And this is the medium I use, Ghungru, a lot in my practice. And followed by that, when the COVID happened, everybody was confined into their spaces, and we all were feeling this loneliness or maybe confusion or maybe lost in our own world. I thought of writing a film because I did not want it to make anything tangible. So I couldn't make the works. But I started writing my new film, Unpromised. Basically, I was thinking of Unpromised Land, but that relates to religion. So I thought, let's call it only Unpromised. So I wanted to figure out the lands which are devastated and also extracted. So I went, I spoke to my team, and they are my collaborators rather than my team. So they all agreed because we were, I think, very stuck in the houses. So we thought, let's take permission and go for making a film. And we started our journey, me and my cinematographer Nitin, who's there, the bald guy. Me and him, we started our journey, and we went to 7 states of India at that time when some relaxation of COVID happened, and then we really experienced amazing landscapes of India. When it is empty, without people, it's beautiful landscape, I must say that. I really experienced this beauty at that time when people were dying also. But that was the reality of our time. And I imagined this film to be, okay, let this run, then I'll speak. So I imagined it to be a panoramic film which should be on like scale of 46, 50 foot, and I wanted people to immerse within the film. So it was in loop, you can come anytime when the film is on, and so you can experience. And the music, I think music and the scale were the elevating point in this film, and to kind of bring people to the closer to the landscape and also to the devastation what we are doing, and what if we are left alone on this planet. So there was this body which was walking in these landscapes which was unidentified with its identity, it's man, woman, black or white. So because I think these are real issues of our times, I think we need to grow away from that and look into the nature, because I think that's the most urgent issue we are dealing with. Followed by that, and to end my presentation, I will show you this new sculpture, my real great deviation now, which is Future Fable, which is still on in Chhatarpur at one of the farmhouses of my friend at Stir. So basically, I thought of debris. In my previous exhibition, also Insanity in the Age of Reason, I have used debris as the earth element, because I think we are replacing the natural earth to this concrete land. And also there is a lot of urban waste which is lying around in Delhi and in other places of India. The climatic zones where the debris is going to be a very, very large issue to handle, to clean up, post the climate catastrophes. And also looking at the war zones where now we see these images of broken buildings and there is a lot of debris. I don't know who's going to benefit out of that by cleaning it, but I feel that these are the very, very important issues, and I thought, why not to create another satire of using this material into artwork where I'm repurposing this material. It really took us a long time and to create funds also for this large sculpture. Come on. Okay. And there is a sound also in this sculpture which you hear.
The legacy of neglect we are forced to bear. In the words of hope, resilience takes hold. Amidst the debris, stories unfold. Relieve the tumultuous sky where chaos aligns. In the contest of despair where suffering combines, debris tells a story, a narrative untold, of climatic disasters and wars uncontrolled. War's relentless grasp leaves landscapes scarred, a symphony of destruction, shards scattered far. Forced migration, a desperate exodus unfolds. Families displaced, their tales left untold. Through desert and oceans, seeking a home in the debris of borders, shattered and torn.
Thank you.
Well, friends, for me it has been a great evening of discovery of what three of them were doing. I've only seen this last work of Vibha, the other works and the approaches that they have, and the way they have so creatively, so imaginatively, wonderfully deviated into something. So now is the time. We have to ask anything to each other? Or we are already too late? So maybe if there are questions to be asked. Yes, please. Wait for the, and speak your name, please.
My name is Yogesh. I'm absolutely spellbound by each of the presentations that all three of you gave. But the one thing that really was a common chord was the scale and the beauty of the art that you presented, like each one of you, I mean the size of the art, like what you've done with the metal and where you displayed it, the exhibition you did in Vibha, what you've done with Yamuna's, the material that you did, 6 or 7 feet. I was just thinking for the kind of thought-provoking art that you've created and the fact that it touches, and Ravi, you talked about how possibilities emerge. Is there a place like, there was times where the Delhi metro space was available where art of this scale was put out, and it starts an engagement with lakhs of people who come to that place and engage with your art. So is there a kind of initiative like that? Because the scale and the size and the thought-provoking art that you have really has that engagement, which could be an ongoing affair, right? It could be for the first month. And is there some thought like that to get this engagement going?
Can I answer that?
Yeah, please.
When I was chairman of the Political Academy, a decision which I deeply regret, having been very stupid of me to have accepted it. Metro was the thing, so I tried to persuade them to provide some space for two things, for art and for poetry. I gave them the examples from London Metro, where they have lines of poems and they publish an anthology. 2 anthologies were published, which have ran into 1 million copies. So people not only were seeing them, but also buying them. And second was to provide a space where, there was enough space, I thought, to provide a space where art could be. And especially those kinds of art, which are not just pieces of beauty, but interrogative art, public art, engaging in public issues and things like that. But I tried to, nothing happened. First, they said, will the Political Academy pay for the space hire? Because by that time, the idea was that the metro should be self-sufficient. We have suffered from this idea, everything should become self-sufficient. So how does it become self-sufficient? It's only by selling. And therefore, it did not happen.
Any other alternative space where something like that could be? Because they've come up with these parks where they use recycling, like what you showed, you've done at some farmhouse, but they have these, gardens that the corporation has created now, where they use recycled material and make these very interesting. So I think something on those lines would be absolutely spectacular, where we could see your art and engage, and a large community of people.
Organize. I'll be more than happy.
Maybe we look at some CSR. And Manisha, I really wanted to compliment you on this, this shadow and the play of your metal installations, and very surreal and look beautiful. So I look forward to seeing it at one of your next shows.
There have been occasions, for example, in the 48 degree show in 2009, where I was part of. So I think there have been occasions when public space has opened up for a brief period. And for example, I showed this work on vultures on the Mandi House roundabout. I had 4 photographs which were almost 15 meters by 10 meters on the 4 corners, and inside the Natural History Museum I did an installation of the extinct vulture, and so there was a large installation, and that's the main crossing point from Connaught Place to East Delhi, right? So there used to be a traffic jam, and one evening it was so much of a traffic jam because people stopped to look at the photographs. One very senior police guy came and he said, "Ye aapka kaam hai?" Maine kaha, I started darting him. He said, "Nahi." He started talking about his village, and he said, "I used to see these vultures in our village, I don't see them anymore." I was surprised at how he talked about the vultures instead of the traffic which he was managing. So art opens up spaces which are not possible, conversations which are not possible otherwise. Unfortunately, I did another project called Yamuna LP project on the banks of the Yamuna, the large Indo-German project, and it was a nightmare to get clearances because Delhi is between federal and central, so it was a complete nightmare to get clearances, and so the idea of public space is a very contested space. I don't even call it public space. It's actually it's space which is owned by somebody or the other. There's no publicness of the space. So there's no space where public is invited to do something in a space. So I think it's a city problem of how it manages space. And space is not available. And of course now I think, I dare say, space has become highly washed, and if you do even something slightly what somebody might consider out of bound, you have consequences. So it's very much to link to what the idea of space is. In the DDA park, I remember, because I was curating it, I was invited by and I had met Sheila Dixit then, and she knew what I was doing. I'd also met the police commissioner. It wasn't that I was doing it out of the blue. It had all the clearances. I had to get 20 clearances from the MCD, from the flood and irrigation department, from the fire department, from the, I don't know how many clearances we had to get. And each one had their own conditions of getting clearances. So what kind of public space is that? You know, we don't live in a public accessible city. So we have to think about what is public in the public space and who the public is.
That gives an idea. We might have a discussion on that. Well, thank you very much. Our next Art Matters will be next month. Some of you who have come here for the first time may kindly keep this in mind. We hold this once in a month, barring May and June. Sure, over here. Now you can go home and when you want to.